There's something haunting about the way time swallows entire worlds, whole ways of life that once thrived, now reduced to fragments and whispers. Picture this, a ceremony performed under the light of a full moon, voices chanting words no one remembers, hands moving in gestures whose meanings have drifted away like smoke. These are the echoes of traditions lost to history, rituals that once bound communities together, now buried beneath the sands of time. Today, we're uncovering 42 of these mysterious practices, each a window into civilizations that have vanished but left behind clues to who they were. From sacred dances that summoned the rain to initiation, rites that transformed boys into warriors, these forgotten customs tell stories of belief, survival, and wonder. Why do they matter now? Because they remind us that even the most enduring traditions can fade, and that every culture, no matter how mighty, leaves behind traces of its soul. So join us as we piece together these puzzles of the past and discover how the secrets of our ancestors still resonate in ways we're only beginning to understand. High on the windswept plateaus of Tibet, where the air is thin and the mountains touch the sky, a ceremony unfolded for centuries that most of the world has never seen. It was called a sky burial, a ritual both beautiful and haunting, where the departed were returned to the cycle of nature in the most profound way imaginable. Instead of being buried or burned, the body was placed on a sacred rock, exposed to the elements and the wings of vultures. To outsiders, it might seem stark, but for Tibetan Buddhists, it was the purest expression of impermanence. Monks would chant ancient prayers, guiding the soul's journey as the physical form dissolved back into the world, carried aloft by scavengers. This was no act of neglect, but one of deep reverence, a belief that the body, like all things, was fleeting, and that in letting it nourish other creatures, death became an offering rather than an end. Yet today, this practice is fading, pushed aside by modern burial customs, government restrictions, and shifting attitudes. What does it mean when such a sacred tradition disappears? Perhaps it's a sign of how we've grown distant from nature's cycles, how we've traded the raw honesty of impermanence for the illusion of permanence. In the silence left behind by these vanishing rituals, we're left to wonder, what else have we forgotten about the sacredness of letting go? Imagine standing on a moonlit beach in ancient Polynesia, the air thick with the scent of salt and smoke as warriors circle a roaring fire, their bodies moving in perfect sync with the pounding of drums. This was no mere performance, it was a sacred act, a ritual where fire became a bridge between the human and the divine. The forgotten fire dances of Polynesia weren't just about spectacle, they were a language of flames, each twist and spin a prayer for strength, protection, and the favor of the gods. These warriors believed the fire could cleanse fear, ignite courage, and even foretell the outcome of battle through the way the embers scattered. The dances varied from island to island, some with spinning torches that traced constellations in the dark, others with bare hands that seemed to command the fire itself. But the heart of the ritual was always the same, a communion between dancer, flame, and the unseen forces that guided their world. Then came the slow erasure. Colonization brought missionaries who saw these dances as pagan, governments that banned them, and generations forced to hide or abandon their traditions. The fire didn't die out completely. Today's hula and fire knife dances still dazzle crowds, but something vital was lost along the way. The chants that once held specific meanings are now fragments. The movements that once told stories of creation and war have become detached from their deeper purpose. Yet in the flicker of a modern fire knife dancer's blade, you can still catch glimpses of that old magic. Researchers and cultural revivalists are piecing together what they can from oral histories and scattered records, but some secrets may be gone forever. What does it say about us that the very rituals meant to unite people with their history became casualties of it? Perhaps the answer lies not in mourning what's lost, but in tending what remains, keeping the embers alive so the next generation can fan them back into flame. High in the rugged cliffs of the Canary Islands, where deep valleys stretch for miles, shepherds once held entire conversations without ever speaking a word, just whistles. This was Silbo Gomero, a language where melodies replaced sentences, where sharp, rising tones could mean "bring the sheep down," and a quick, falling trill might signal danger ahead. Across the sea in Turkey, another whistling language called Kushkari did the same, turning human breath into a code that could travel farther than any shout. These weren't random signals, they were fully formed languages, complex enough to convey gossip, warnings, even jokes, all with nothing but pitch and rhythm. Think about how extraordinary that is. In places where voices couldn't carry across the cliffs or through dense forests, people reinvented communication. They shaped their breath into something practical yet almost magical, turning geography into music. A shepherd on one hilltop could whistle a single phrase, and minutes later, someone a mile away would nod and act. No phones, no radios, just pure ingenuity. But now, these languages are fading. Modern technology makes whistling seem obsolete, and younger generations glued to screens rarely learn the old tunes. Linguists work feverishly to record the last fluent whistlers, knowing that once they're gone, an entire way of thinking could vanish with them. What's truly haunting isn't just the loss of the languages themselves, but what they represent, the human ability to shape the world with nothing but creativity and need. These whistles weren't just tools, they were proof that language isn't confined to words on a page or sounds in the mouth. It's alive, adaptable, as fluid as the wind that carried them. So when the last whistler falls silent, we won't just lose a curiosity, we'll lose a piece of the puzzle of what it means to be human. The echoes still linger in those remote valleys, but the question remains, will anyone be left to hear them? Beneath the vast blue sky of Mongolia, where the wind whispers across endless grasslands, nomadic shamans once carried libraries unlike any the world had seen. These weren't books or scrolls, they were bones, carved into the ribs of deer, the shoulder blades of wolves, and the skulls of eagles were intricate symbols, a sacred script believed to channel the voices of ancestors and spirits. Each bone held secrets, prophecies etched into curves, healing charms hidden in grooves, even maps of the spirit world scratched onto surfaces as fragile as memory itself. To the shamans, these weren't mere objects. They were alive with knowledge, vibrating with the power to cure sickness, foresee droughts, or guide lost souls home. But the bone libraries carried a darker weight too. Some inscriptions were said to summon forces. Even the shamans feared spells that could unravel destinies or invoke curses if read aloud. That's why, when Buddhist monks began spreading across Mongolia in the 13th century, many of these bones were burned or buried, their wisdom treated as dangerous magic. The shamans who guarded them vanished into the steppes, taking their rituals with them. Today, only scattered fragments survive, displayed under museum glass or tucked away in private collections, their meanings as fragmented as the bones themselves. What's haunting is how much we'll never know. Modern scholars can decipher some symbols, a zigzag for lightning, a spiral for the cycle of life, but the deeper layers of meaning are lost. Were these bones maps to sacred sites, manuals for communicating with the dead? The truth might lie buried in unmarked graves or hidden in caves, waiting for a stray gust of wind to uncover them. And yet, even in their silence, they tell us something profound. That knowledge isn't always meant to last. Some wisdom was never written to be preserved, but to be used to breathe alongside the people who needed it, then return to the earth when its time was done. Perhaps that's the most mysterious lesson of all, that disappearance can be part of the story too. In the flickering glow of an oil lamp, shadows dance across a thin cotton screen, twisting into gods, demons, and heroes whose stories have echoed through the night for over 1,000 years. This was Wayang Kulit, the ancient shadow plays of Java, where puppets carved from buffalo hide became vessels for something far greater than entertainment. The puppeteer, or dalang, wasn't just a storyteller, they were a bridge between realms, their voice channeling divine wisdom, their hands guiding the audience through cosmic battles between light and darkness. Every performance began with offerings, whispered invocations, and the careful arrangement of puppets to honor ancestral spirits. The screen itself was a boundary, separating the seen from the unseen, while the shadows became a language of the sacred. Yet beneath the spectacle, there was a hidden layer. Certain plays weren't merely performed, they were rituals. A dalang might stage a specific story to heal a sick child, summon rain during a drought, or even ward off misfortune from a village. The movements of the puppets followed strict, secret patterns, their gestures carrying coded messages understood only by initiates. Some puppets were never shown to the public, kept wrapped in sacred cloth, brought out only for ceremonies, their very presence believed to hold power. But as Java modernized, the deeper magic of Wayang Kulit began to recede. Colonial rulers dismissed it as superstition. Later, governments repackaged it as cultural heritage, scrubbing away its spiritual core to suit tourist audiences. Today, you can still watch Wayang Kulit under festival tents or YouTube videos, but the rituals that once pulsed beneath the surface are rare. The dalang who remember the old prayers, the hidden meanings of puppet placements, the precise chants to open the veil between worlds, they're dwindling. Scholars piece together fragments from old manuscripts and elderly masters, but some secrets are gone forever, evaporated like the smoke from the oil lamps that once lit them. What does it mean when an art form survives but its soul fades? Perhaps the answer lies in the shadows themselves, always there, but shifting with every tilt of the light, reminding us that tradition isn't just about preserving the form, but listening for the whispers still trapped within it. In the mist-wrapped valleys of Bhutan, where prayer flags flutter like whispered secrets between mountain peaks, the masked dances known as Cham once pulsed with a power beyond performance. Monks, their faces hidden behind carved wooden visages of wrathful deities and grinning demons, moved in precise, sacred steps not for applause, but as a shield against unseen darkness. These weren't mere costumes, the masks themselves were believed to be vessels, their hollow eyes and frozen expressions channeling the very spirits they represented. When a monk donned the mask of Mahakola, the fierce protector, it wasn't acting. It was invocation. The dance became a battle, a blessing, a way to cleanse the air of malevolence before the new year or a harvest. Every whirl of silk robes, every stomp of booted feet, followed ancient rhythms tied to the moon's phases, as if the cosmos itself dictated the timing of these rituals. But the world beyond Bhutan's borders began to creep in. Roads brought tourists hungry for photo opportunities. Schools prioritized math and science over the memorization of 100-step dances. Younger monks, drawn to smartphones and streaming shows, found the rigorous training less compelling than their elders had. The masks still gleamed in monastery storerooms, their colors bright, their edges sharp, but fewer and fewer hands knew how to animate them properly. A dance meant to summon rain might now be performed for camera flashes, stripped of the prayers that once gave it meaning. Here's the paradox: as Cham dances gain global attention as cultural treasures, their spiritual heartbeat fades. Museums display the masks behind glass, labels explaining their symbolism without acknowledging the life they once held. Scholars record the steps, but can they capture the weight of a monk's belief as he spun? Certain his movements kept his village safe. The dances haven't vanished entirely, festivals still draw crowds, and some monasteries fight to teach the old ways, but the line between living tradition and relic grows thinner each year. What's lost isn't just the choreography, but the unshakable faith that a piece of carved wood could hold a god's gaze. Perhaps the true test isn't whether the dancers survive, but whether anyone still hears the whispers behind the masks when the music stops. Hanging from ropes woven from bamboo fibers, suspended hundreds of feet above the jungle floor, the honey hunters of Nepal moved with a quiet precision that bordered on the sacred. For the Gurung people, harvesting wild honey wasn't just a task, it was a dialogue with the cliffs themselves. Before a single rope was tied, prayers rose like smoke from smoldering juniper branches, offerings laid at the base of the rock face to appease the spirits believed to dwell within. The hunters knew these cliffs weren't mere stone. They were alive with unseen forces that could snatch a careless worker into the abyss or bless them with a bounty of golden combs. The harvest was a ballet of risk and reverence. Men descended the cliffs on ladders made of vines, their hands coated in bitter herbs to ward off the furious bees. As smoke curled upward to pacify the swarms, blades sliced through wax heavy with honey, careful always to leave enough for the colony to survive. Every cut was measured, every gesture intentional, because to take too much was to insult the mountain's generosity. The honey itself was never just food. It was medicine, currency, and sacrament, used in rituals to heal the sick or seal marriages. But the world shifted. Commercial beekeeping offered safer, sweeter profits, and younger generations turned away from the vertigo-inducing climbs. The prayers to cliff spirits faded, replaced by the hum of manufactured hives. Now, only a handful of elders remember the old chants, the precise knots for the ropes, the way the wind sounded when the spirits were pleased. Scientists marvel at the ecological wisdom embedded in these rituals, how leaving half the comb ensured bees thrived, how the hunter's timing followed blooming seasons invisible to outsiders. What's haunting isn't just the loss of the tradition, but the intimacy it represented, a relationship with nature that wasn't about domination, but negotiation. The cliffs still loom, honey-laden and silent, waiting for hands that may never come. And in that absence, we're left to wonder, did we trade safety for something far more precious? The understanding that some gifts must be earned, not taken. The hives of commercial farms may be plentiful, but their honey carries no whispers of the wind, no echoes of the prayers that once made the harvest holy. Deep in the canyons of the American Southwest, where the desert sky stretches endless and unpolluted, the Navajo people once read the stars like pages of a living book. Every constellation held layers of meaning, not just shapes, but stories, warnings, and instructions woven into the fabric of daily life. The Pleiades weren't merely a cluster of stars, they were the Diliae, the seed stars, whose rising signaled the time to plant corn. Orion's belt became the Atse-Etsozi, the first slim one, a hunter whose position in the sky dictated when to track deer. These weren't abstract myths. They were a sophisticated celestial almanac honed over generations to sync human survival with the universe's rhythms. The knowledge lived in the voices of elders who passed down star maps not on paper, but through songs and stories told under open skies. A grandmother pointing to Scorpio might teach her granddaughter how its curve mirrored the poisonous lizard's tail, a reminder to avoid certain herbs when that shape dominated the night. A chant about the Milky Way could encode migration routes for elk, its shimmering path mirroring trails etched into the earth. This was science and spirituality intertwined, a way of navigating both land and life with the stars as guides. But the threads of this cosmic tapestry are fraying. Urban lights bleach the night sky, drowning out the very stars that once directed planting and pilgrimage. Younger generations, eyes fixed on screens, often know more about app algorithms than the Diliae's seasonal rise. The elders who hold these star stories are dwindling, and with each one who passes, a chapter of this celestial library burns away. Astronomers now study Navajo star lore with fascination. recognizing its precision, how it tracked solstices long before telescopes, how it encoded ecological cues modern science is only beginning to decipher. Yet there's a quiet tragedy in that admiration. The stars haven't changed, they still rise and set as they always have. But without the stories, without the voices that gave them meaning, they're reduced to distant specks, beautiful but silent. What's lost isn't just knowledge, but a way of seeing, a reminder that we once understood ourselves as part of a larger conversation written in light. The night sky remains indifferent to whether anyone still reads its messages, while below, the desert wind carries whispers of the words we've forgotten to listen for. In the heart of Borneo's rainforests, where the rivers carve through emerald canopies, skin was never just skin, it was parchment, altar, and armor all at once. The indigenous Iban and Koyan peoples wore their histories in swirling black ink, tattoos that coiled around limbs like living vines. A man's hand might bear the rosette of a successful headhunter, each line marking a spiritual triumph. A woman's fingers could shimmer with delicate dots, a map of her skill in weaving or the protective gaze of ancestors. These weren't decorations, they were rites of passage, earned through pain and patience, each prick of the needle a pact between the physical and spirit worlds. The ink itself held power, mixed with soot from sacred hearths or pulped from rare jungle resins. It carried the essence of the land into the body. Yet the true magic lay in the symbols. A hornbill's wing inked across a shoulder wasn't just art. It was a plea for flight and freedom in the afterlife. Interlocking spirals on a calf could trace a warrior's journey through unseen realms, while zigzagging lines along the throat might deflect malevolent spirits. Elders read skin like librarians deciphering ancient texts, knowing at a glance who had survived fevers, fought beasts, or communed with the dead. The tattoos spoke a language deeper than words, one that bound the living to their bloodline and the land that birthed them. Now that language is being overwritten. Tourists flock to Borneo seeking tribal ink, but the designs they leave with are often hollow echoes, a dragon copied from a photo, not a spirit guide received in a sweat-filled longhouse ceremony. Local youths, lured by cities and smartphones, trade the slow burn of traditional hand tapping for sterile tattoo parlors where gun needles buzz under fluorescent lights. The symbols remain, but the stories behind them crumble like a book with its pages ripped out, leaving only the cover. Anthropologists scramble to document the vanishing art, pressing elders for meanings before they're lost. Some revivalists try piecing together fragments, mixing old patterns with new techniques, but it's an imperfect translation. Without the chants that once accompanied each stroke, without the smell of smoked herbs thick in the air, the tattoos become mere shadows of what they once were. Yet in remote villages, a few stubborn keepers persist, ink-stained hands moving in rhythms older than memory, ensuring that at least some of the skin stories survive. The question isn't whether these tattoos will endure, but whether we'll ever again understand the weight of the worlds they once held. Deep in the rainforests of Central Africa, where the trees grow so dense they blot out the sun, sound became a lifeline and the drum became a voice. For centuries, tribes like the Yoruba and the Ashanti perfected a language without words, where rhythms pulsed through the air like coded whispers. These weren't just signals, they were conversations as nuanced as spoken dialect. A master drummer could mimic the tonal patterns of their people's speech so precisely that villagers miles apart would hear not just beats but sentences. A rapid staccato might announce a birth, a low, rolling pattern could warn of approaching danger, and on moonlit nights the drums even carried love poems, their cadences tracing the rise and fall of a lover's sigh. The genius of these drum languages lay in their duality. Each rhythm mirrored the natural tones of the local tongue, high pitches for certain syllables, deep thuds for others, transforming music into grammar. In Ghana, the talking drums of the Akan people could reproduce proverbs so accurately that elders could identify the speaker just by the drum's accent. A skilled listener could decode politics, gossip, or funeral rites from the patterns, as if the drumskin itself had learned to speak. But the 20th century brought a slow hush. Radios crackled to life in remote villages, telegraph wires sliced across borders, and suddenly the drum's voice seemed quaint next to the speed of modern technology. Younger generations, eager to embrace the new, let the old rhythms fade. Today, fewer than 100 true masters of drum languages remain, most of them aging men whose hands still remember beats their grandchildren can't decipher. Linguists race to document the patterns, but something vital resists recording the instinctive flow between drummer and listener, the way a village once breathed with the drum's pulse. Here's what's haunting: when a drum language dies, it doesn't just vanish, it takes with it a way of hearing. Modern ears, trained on the flat tones of digital alerts, struggle to grasp how sound once carried layers of meaning across valleys and rivers. The drums still exist, displayed in museums or played for tourists, but without the context of their language, they're just noise. Perhaps that's the true loss, not just the messages themselves, but the understanding that communication could ever be so alive, so woven into the air itself. The forests still echo with the ghost of those beats, waiting for someone to listen properly one last time. Imagine biting into a warm loaf of bread, only to find a glint of carved stone hidden in the dough, a tiny eye of Horus or a coiled serpent, not by accident but by design. In ancient Egypt, bread wasn't just sustenance, it was a vessel for magic. Bakers kneaded spells into the flour, embedding amulets meant to dissolve curses, spark desire, or even sway the loyalties of those who consumed them. These weren't mere trinkets, they were edible contracts with the divine, their power activated by digestion. A love-struck noble might commission a loaf studded with rose quartz charms, while a pharaoh's rival could unknowingly swallow bread laced with malachite symbols meant to weaken their resolve. The rituals were precise. The dough had to be mixed under specific incantations, the amulets cleansed in sacred water, and the baking timed to the rising of Sirius, the star tied to Isis herself. But the true brilliance lay in the deception. Unlike obvious potions or scrolls, these enchanted loaves left no trace. A target would never suspect the bread at their feast carried a hidden agenda. Historians have uncovered temple records describing how a single batch of protection loaves was baked for an entire army, each soldier unknowingly fortified against enemy sorcery with every bite. Yet for all their cunning, these practices were fragile. The exact recipes, what kind of flour held magic best, which words to whisper as the oven heated, were guarded secrets passed only between master bakers and priests. When temples fell and empires shifted, the knowledge crumbled like stale crusts. Today, archaeologists find these amulets scattered in ruins, far from the loaves that once housed them. Some are still flecked with traces of ancient wheat, a ghostly reminder of their original purpose. Modern labs can analyze the residues, but the incantations, the subtle variations in baking that turned flour and charm into something transcendent, those are lost to the heat of time. What lingers is the eerie realization. In a civilization that built pyramids to cheat death, even something as humble as bread could be a weapon, a prayer, or a promise, all depending on the hunger of the one who held it. High in the Andes, where thin air makes the stars burn brighter, the Inca once held ceremonies so precisely timed that the moon itself seemed to pause to listen. Every phase of Mama Quilla, the moon goddess, dictated their world: when to plant potatoes, when to marry, even when to go to war. Priests studied the lunar cycles from stone observatories, their calculations so exact they could predict eclipses years in advance. They didn't just watch the moon, they spoke to it, offering silver figurines, maize beer, and the rhythmic sway of dancers whose steps mimicked the celestial rhythms. In Cusco, the Temple of the Moon gleamed with sheets of precious metal, its walls angled to catch the moonlight in ways that painted sacred geometry across the floors. To the Inca, the moon wasn't a distant rock. It was a living force, its waxing and waning tied to the tides of human fortune. Then came the conquest. Spanish priests smashed the altars, melted down the silver, and forbade the ceremonies, calling them devilry. The precise lunar calendars carved into knotted Quipus strings were burned as heresy. Overnight, generations of astronomical wisdom became forbidden knowledge. Today, archaeologists piece together fragments, a temple alignment here, a surviving quipu not there but the chants, the dances, the intimate understanding of how Mama Quilla's light affected crops and childbirth. Those are gaps no artifact can fill. Modern scholars have discovered that some Inca moon observations were shockingly advanced, tracking subtle lunar wobbles that weren't officially documented until the invention of telescopes. What's haunting isn't just the loss of knowledge, but the silencing of a relationship. The stones of Machu Picchu still catch the moonlight at the exact angles the Inca intended, but no one stands there now to read their meaning. The terraces that once thrived under lunar-guided planting schedules now grow crops by modern methods, divorced from the old rhythms. Yet in remote villages, whispers persist, an elder planting by the moon's phase, a midwife consulting the night sky during a difficult birth. These fragments hint at a truth: the moon never stopped speaking. We just forgot how to listen. The real mystery isn't what the Inca knew about the cosmos, but how much they understood about the quiet, luminous thread tying heaven to earth, and what we might rediscover if we dared to look up again with their eyes. On the frozen edges of the Arctic, where ice meets the endless stretch of the sea, Inuit hunters once stood on the precipice of two worlds, human and cetacean, and bridged them with nothing but their voices. For centuries, they filled their lungs with freezing air and released sounds so precise, so hauntingly familiar, that whales would rise from the depths to meet them. These weren't random calls, they were ancient melodies, a lexicon of hums, clicks, and resonant tones passed down through generations like a sacred oral map. Each family had their own variations, subtle twists in pitch or rhythm that identified their lineage, as distinctive as a surname. The hunters knew these songs could mean the difference between survival and starvation, a harmonious pact between species where respect dictated the take. No more whales were summoned than the community needed, and every part of the animal was honored from blubber to bone. But the songs carried more than practicality, they held a philosophy. Inuit elders spoke of whales as willing participants in the hunt, drawn not by deception but by mutual recognition. To sing was to enter a conversation older than recorded time, one where humans acknowledged their place within nature's balance, not above it. The melodies were taught alongside strict ethical codes: never call a mother with her calf, never take more than the ice could spare. This wasn't domination, it was negotiation, an unspoken treaty written in sound waves. Then came the rupture. Modernity seeped in with motorized boats and sonar devices, rendering the old songs obsolete. Younger generations, lured by wage jobs and supermarket conveniences, abandoned the arduous hunts, and with them, the vocal rituals that once defined their relationship with the sea. Recording devices captured some of the last master callers, but without the context, the ice beneath their feet, the anticipation in their breath, the whale's answering call, the recordings feel like half a dialogue. Marine biologists now study these fragments with fascination, noting how closely the Inuits' mimicry matched actual whale vocalizations, a feat of auditory precision science still can't fully explain. What's lost isn't just the technique, but the worldview it embodied. Today, drones and hydrophones track whale migrations, but no machine can replicate the intimacy of that exchange. The moment when a hunter's voice trembled in the cold air and somewhere below, a creature 20 times his size chose to answer. The Arctic winds still carry echoes of those songs, but the silence between them grows wider each year. Perhaps the whales still sing their half of the conversation, waiting for voices that may never come again. And in that absence, we're left to wonder, did we gain efficiency only to forfeit the rare privilege of being heard and understood by giants? The vast plains of North America once hummed with a language written not in words, but in tendrils of smoke rising against the endless blue. For tribes like the Lakota, Apache, and Nez Perce, a single column curling skyward could announce a hunter's return, while a sudden burst of 3 quick puffs might send villages scrambling. Enemies were near. These signals weren't random. They were a refined code, as precise as Morse, with variations tailored to terrain and tribe. In the southwest, spirals of smoke threaded through canyon walls to relay trading schedules, while along the Great Lakes, staggered puffs could coordinate fishing routes across hundreds of miles. The genius lay in its simplicity. Dry grass bundled with damp leaves to control the smoke's density, blankets flapped like bellows to shape its rhythm, all without a single shout. Yet the true artistry wasn't just in sending messages, but in reading the silence between them. A pause after 2 puffs could differentiate buffalo sighted from strangers approaching. The direction of the drift revealed wind patterns hinting at coming storms. Elders taught children to decode these nuances as meticulously as scribes transcribing sacred texts, because in a land without borders, survival depended on this ethereal telegraph. The system was so reliable that during the 1800s, the US military even hired native signalers to outmaneuver rivals, marveling at how complex strategies could unfold without a single spoken word. Then came the wires. Telegraph poles stitched the continent together, radios crackled to life in trading posts, and suddenly, smoke seemed slow, obsolete. The knowledge that once flowed as freely as prairie wind became confined to ceremonial reenactments or Hollywood cliches. Today, few remember which plants burned clearest for long-distance signals or how to layer pine needles to mute the smoke's color for covert warnings. Linguists note the cruel irony. While modern tech archives endangered spoken languages, the silent language of smoke left no recordings, no dictionaries, just impressions fading like vapor on a breezy day. What's lost isn't merely a communication tool, but a philosophy. Smoke signals demanded patience. A message took time to craft and disperse, time for others to spot and interpret. In an era of instant texts and flashing alerts, we've erased the art of waiting, the grace of ambiguity, the shared responsibility of watching the horizon. The sky still stretches as wide as it ever did, but the conversations that once danced across it have gone quiet, leaving only the faintest scent of charred sage on the wind, a reminder that some dialogues were never meant to be rushed. In the golden halls of Tang Dynasty China, where scholars brushed ink onto silk and emperors held court beneath painted eaves, tea was never just a drink, it was a portal to the sublime. The ritual began before the water even boiled, with masters selecting leaves as meticulously as poets choosing words, each variety believed to unlock different states of mind. Cloud-picked teas from misty mountains were prized for their clarity, while fermented bricks from distant provinces carried earthy notes said to ground the spirit. The preparation was a dance, water heated to the precise moment before shrimp eyes bubbles formed, poured in slow spirals over leaves arranged like sacred geometry in celadon bowls. To serve tea was to orchestrate an ephemeral art, one where steam curling upward mirrored the strokes of calligraphy, and the first sip was meant to dissolve the boundary between drinker and drank. Poets like Lu Tong immortalized these moments in verse, describing how 7 cups could transport him from mundane awareness to celestial revelation. Tea gatherings became salons of the mind, where the clink of porcelain punctuated debates on Taoist harmony or Buddhist emptiness. A perfectly brewed cup was a mirror reflecting the drinker's inner state, cloudy for distraction, clear for enlightenment. The tea itself was a teacher, its bitterness a reminder of life's impermanence, its sweetness a glimpse of transcendence. Yet as dynasties rose and fell, the rituals unraveled. The Ming dynasty favored simplicity, loose leaves steeped in unadorned pots, a shift that mirrored society's turn toward pragmatism. The intricate tea cakes, the layered ceremonies, the poems recited over steaming cups all faded like ink in the rain. Modern tea drinkers might savor the same leaves, but the context has vanished. We measure steeps with timers, not heartbeats. We scroll through screens while sipping, mistaking multitasking for presence. Archaeologists have found Tang-era tea utensils buried with nobles, as if they couldn't bear to part with them even in death. Museums display these delicate strainers and whisks, but no placard can capture the weight of silence between sips, the way a room once held its breath as the fragrance unfurled. Perhaps the deepest loss isn't the rituals themselves, but the understanding that a humble leaf could be a compass pointing not north, but inward. The wisdom wasn't in the tea, it was in the slowness, the intentionality, the space created around something as simple as hot water meeting leaves. Today, we've gained convenience, but the leaves still whisper the same question. How much richness have we traded for speed? Their silence is the echo of 1,000 forgotten mornings when the world paused and a cup held the universe. Hidden in the vaults of museums and private collections, coiled like sleeping serpents, lie the last remaining quipus of the Inca, colorful cords knotted into cryptic patterns that once held the heartbeat of an empire. To the untrained eye, they're just strings. To the Inca, they were libraries. Each knot's position, each cord's twist and hue, encoded everything from tax records to epic poems, from astronomical data to the genealogies of kings. The Quipucamayocs, the keepers of these knots, could run their fingers along the strands and recite census figures or war declarations with the ease of a scholar reading parchment. The system was so precise that some scholars believe Quipus may have even captured philosophy or music abstract concepts rendered tactile, history woven into fiber. But the Quipus' brilliance was also their fragility. Unlike stone carvings or clay tablets, their meaning relied entirely on living memory. When the Spanish arrived, they saw not sophistication but sorcery, burning Quipus by the thousands and executing the Quipucamayocs who refused to reveal their secrets. Overnight, a civilization's archives turned to ash, leaving behind only scattered knots whose context had vanished with their readers. Today, researchers peer at surviving Quipus under microscopes, noting how tight spirals might represent multiples of 10, or how pendant strings could branch into subcategories like a spreadsheet made tangible. Yet without the Quipucamayoc's guidance, the deeper narratives, the victories, the laments, the prayers tied into these chords remain locked away. The greatest tragedy isn't just the loss of information, but the silencing of a radically different way of thinking. Quipus didn't just record data, they embodied it. The tension of a knot, the friction between strands, the way colors faded with handling. These were part of the message, a language that engaged the senses beyond sight. Modern attempts to decode them rely on binary logic, but the Inca likely thought in layers where a single knot could hold literal and symbolic meaning simultaneously. The few Andean communities who still tie ceremonial quipus today speak of them as living entities, vibrating with the energy of the hands that made them. What secrets might unwind if we could hear these knots speak? Perhaps the answer isn't in deciphering them, but in recognizing what their existence tells us, that writing isn't confined to ink, that memory can be held in the palm of a hand, and that some of history's most profound conversations were never written at all, but tied, one loop at a time, into the quiet patience of string. The quipus that survive are more than artifacts. They're unanswered questions coiled tight and waiting for the right hands to trace their stories back to life. Deep beneath the earth in the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet, where torchlight once flickered against paintings of charging bison and galloping horses, another kind of art filled the darkness sound. These caverns weren't just galleries, they were resonance chambers where every footstep, every breath echoed like a drumbeat in a cathedral. Researchers have discovered something astonishing. The densest clusters of ancient paintings aren't randomly placed. They're positioned in chambers with the most powerful acoustics, where a single voice could multiply into a chorus, where a hand clap might ripple through the stone like thunder. The artists didn't just paint here, they sang, chanted, perhaps even called to the animals they depicted, their voices twisting through stalactites like invisible threads tying the human and spirit worlds together. But what did those chants sound like? Without written records, we're left with tantalizing clues. Archaeologists have found bone flutes in nearby caves, their pitches eerily aligned with the resonant frequencies of the chambers. When played in these spaces today, the notes seem to linger unnaturally, as if the rock itself remembers. Some scholars suggest the chants might have mimicked animal sounds, not just in imitation but in invocation. A low, guttural tone could summon the strength of a bear. A high, wavering cry might channel the swiftness of a stag. These weren't mere performances, they were acts of communion where sound became a bridge between the seen and unseen. Yet the silence now is deafening. Modern visitors whisper in these caves if they're allowed in at all, their footsteps muffled by protective walkways. The songs that once shook the walls have evaporated, leaving only the paintings as silent witnesses. Linguists and musicians have tried reconstructing possible chants using the acoustics as a guide, but without the cultural context, it's like trying to read a book with half the pages torn out. The caves still amplify sound just as powerfully, but the voices that knew how to wield that power are gone. Perhaps the most haunting part isn't the loss of the melodies themselves, but the realization of how deeply sound shaped these sacred spaces. Today, we marvel at the paintings, but we experience them in sterile quiet, completely divorced from the sonic tapestry that once brought them to life. The caves were never meant to be just seen, they were meant to be heard, felt in the chest, vibrating through the bones. What secrets might those painted walls still hold if someone sang the right notes at the right pitch in the right darkness? The stone keeps its secrets, but the air still trembles with the ghost of harmonies we'll never fully know. The floor of a Tibetan monastery at dawn, the only sound is the soft scrape of metal funnels called chak purs as monks guide colored sand into place grain by grain. For weeks, they'll bend over this sacred geometry, building a universe in miniature, concentric circles of sapphire blue and sunflower gold, delicate threads of crushed marble forming palaces where deities dwell. Every granule is a prayer, every hue a metaphor: white for clarity, red for life force, black for the void before creation. The mandala isn't just art, it's a meditation made visible, a map of enlightenment drawn in sand so fine a sigh could erase it. And erase it they do. After days or months of labor, the monks gather in silence. With a single sweep of a hand, the palace crumbles. They brush the sands into an urn, carry them to a river, and pour them back into the current, a reminder that beauty, like life, is fleeting by design. The ritual isn't destruction, it's liberation. The monks chant as the colors dissolve, teaching a lesson Western cultures often resist. That attachment is the root of suffering, and impermanence is the only constant. Yet this very lesson is now slipping away. Fewer young monks commit to the years of training required to master mandala making. The intricate patterns, once memorized through oral instruction, are fading as elders pass without successors. Some monasteries preserve the tradition for tourists, but the sacred context dwindles. The sand is swept up hastily, the chants abbreviated, the philosophy reduced to a photo op. Museums display mandala kits as curiosities, their glass cases implying these are relics, not living practices. Here's the paradox: a ritual meant to teach non-attachment is itself something we're desperate to hold onto. Scientists study the neurological effects of creating mandalas, documenting how the focus required alters brain waves. Psychiatrists borrow the metaphor of impermanence to treat anxiety. But can the essence of the ritual survive outside the monastery walls, divorced from the centuries of Buddhist thought that birthed it? When the last master sand artist lays down his chak pur, we won't just lose a spectacle, we'll lose a compass that pointed unflinchingly toward a truth we spend our lives avoiding. The sands will keep flowing, of course, as they always have, but who will be left to teach us how to let them go? In the hushed stillness of an ancient Greek temple, where the scent of burning laurel leaves mingled with the salt air, sleepers would stretch out on the skins of sacrificed rams, waiting for the gods to speak through their dreams. At Epidaurus and other sacred sites, the line between waking and sleeping blurred into something divine. Pilgrims arrived with ailments of body and soul, believing that Asclepius, the god of medicine, might visit them in the night, not as a vague presence, but as a vivid figure who would touch their wounds or whisper cures into their dreaming ears. The priests, trained in the symbology of visions, would interpret each detail. A snake coiling around a limb could signify healing, while an overflowing cup might warn of excess. These weren't random nightmares or fantasies. They were considered direct messages, a sacred hotline between mortal and divine. But the process was far from passive. Dream seekers underwent rigorous preparation, fasting, bathing in sacred springs, offering honey cakes and clay effigies of afflicted body parts. The temple itself was designed to heighten the experience, with underground chambers that amplified sounds and labyrinthine corridors meant to disorient the conscious mind. When dawn broke, the priests didn't just interpret the dreams. They prescribed tangible treatments based on them: herbs to chew, exercises to perform, even surgical interventions recorded on stone tablets that survive to this day. Remarkably, some of these ancient prescriptions align with modern medical insights, like the use of certain anti-inflammatory plants or the psychological benefits of ritualized hope. Then came the slow unraveling. As Greek philosophy pivoted toward logic and empiricism, the dream temples began to seem like relics of a superstitious past. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, dismissed divine dreams in favor of bodily humors. Aristotle reduced them to mental echoes of daily life. The temples didn't vanish overnight, but their authority crumbled, their priests becoming curiosities rather than sought-after healers. By the time Rome converted to Christianity, the oracles of sleep had been silenced entirely, their practices recast as heresy or madness. Today, neuroscientists study the ancient accounts with fascination. The vivid, directive temple dreams bear striking similarities to lucid dreaming techniques now used in therapy. Modern sleep clinics even observe that certain environments, soft chanting, controlled temperatures, the weight of heavy blankets, can indeed produce unusually vivid and therapeutic dreams. Yet something crucial is missing: the unshakable belief that the sleeping mind could bridge worlds, that a vision might carry not just personal meaning but cosmic truth. We've gained understanding of brain chemistry but lost the poetry of possibility, that sense so palpable in those temple corridors that the night could hold answers daylight couldn't fathom. The stones of Epidaurus still stand, but the dreams they once nurtured have scattered like mist under a rising sun, leaving us to wonder: were the ancients tapping into something we've since forgotten, or simply dressing human hope in divine robes? Either way, their legacy lingers in our very language. The word therapy comes from the Greek therapeia, meaning to serve the gods. Perhaps that's the final whisper of those lost dreamers, a reminder that healing in any era requires something beyond medicine, a touch of mystery, a willingness to listen, and the courage to trust the dark. Imagine a treasure map you could hold in the palm of your hand, not drawn on parchment, but crafted from glass so delicate it could shatter with a single misstep. In the labyrinthine canals of Renaissance Venice, merchants hoarded these fragile secrets like gold. Tiny glass beads, no larger than a pea, were etched with miniature landscapes, coastlines reduced to swirling grooves, harbors marked by specks of cobalt, and safe passages indicated by threads of gold fused into the glass. To the untrained eye, they were mere trinkets. To Venetian traders, they were lifelines. A merchant might press the bead into wax to create an imprint, revealing hidden inlets along the Adriatic or the safest routes past Ottoman patrols. The beads were currency among the initiated, passed hand to hand in darkened alleyways, their true value known only to those who understood the code. But these weren't just maps, they were alibis. If intercepted, a bead could be swallowed or dropped into the canal, leaving no trace. Some were even designed to break under pressure, ensuring their secrets dissolved into the waves if seized. The system was ingenious, a language of trade written in something as innocuous as jewelry, its meaning disguised as decoration. A strand of beads might hang in a noblewoman's window, admired for its beauty while silently cataloguing the wealth of empires. The finest examples contained layers outer glass shells that, when cracked open, revealed smaller beads inside with more sensitive routes, like nested dolls of intrigue. Then came the inevitable shift. Paper charts, though less durable, could be copied and updated easily. Compasses and astrolabes made navigation less reliant on memorized landmarks. The glass beads, once priceless, became curiosities discarded, lost in drawers or melted down for other purposes. Today, a handful survive in museums, their patterns baffling conservators. Infrared scans reveal microscopic etchings too fine for the naked eye, suggesting some maps were meant to be read with lenses or reflected light. But without the cipher to decode them, they're just pretty fragments. The tragedy isn't merely the loss of the maps themselves, but the erasure of a unique language of trust. These beads required intimacy, a master teaching an apprentice not just how to read the glass, but when to share it and with whom. Modern GPS plots a course with cold precision, but it can't replicate the weight of a bead pressed into your hand by a fellow trader, his silent nod saying, "This route kept me alive." The Mediterranean still glitters under the same sun that once lit those glass maps, but the currents they charted, the whispered deals, the hidden coves, the alliances sealed with a clasp of beads, have all faded into the deep. What riches might still lie buried under those unmarked waves, the beads know, but they'll never tell. Long before the first sundial marked its first hour, the ancient Egyptians turned their towering obelisks into something extraordinary, living clocks that measured time not in hours but in shadows. These slender monuments, some reaching heights of 100 feet, weren't just symbols of power. They were celestial timekeepers, their long, creeping shadows painting the passage of the sun across temple courtyards. At dawn, the shadow stretched west, a dark finger pointing to the night's retreat. By midday, it shrank to a mere whisper at the obelisk's base, a silent nod to the sun's zenith. And as evening approached, the shadow stretched east, marking the descent into twilight with geometric precision. But these shadow clocks were more than primitive timepieces. They were sacred instruments, their movements tied to festivals, planting seasons, and even the flooding of the Nile. Priests observed how the shadows aligned with specific temple carvings during solstices, turning stone and sunlight into a cosmic calendar. The obelisks themselves were often placed in pairs, their shadows intertwining at key moments to signal equinoxes, a fleeting dance of darkness and light that announced the balance between day and night. To the Egyptians, time wasn't just measured, it was witnessed, a divine collaboration between earth and sky. Yet as civilizations advanced, the obelisks fell silent. Water clocks and sundials offered more portable, precise ways to track time, and the slow, majestic sweep of shadows became something to glance at, not study. Today, tourists pass by these ancient monoliths, snapping photos without realizing they're standing in the footprints of a forgotten science. The shadows still move exactly as they did millennia ago, but no one stops to read their language. Modern atomic clocks can measure time down to the billionth of a second, but they'll never capture what the Egyptians understood. That time isn't just numbers on a dial, but a story written in light and stone. Perhaps the greatest lesson of these shadow clocks lies in their simplicity. They required no gears, no batteries, just the patient observation of the natural world. In our rush to quantify every moment, we've lost the art of seeing time as something alive, something shaped by the tilt of the planet and the arc of the sun. The obelisks still stand, silent sentinels of an era when humanity kept time by the sky's rhythms. Their shadows still stretch across the earth as they always have, waiting, endlessly waiting for someone to notice. On the windswept hills of Ireland, where mist clings to the grass like forgotten whispers, certain stones hold a secret they talk back, or at least they once did. Scattered across the countryside, these echoing stones would ring clear when struck, their vibrations carrying farther than any human voice. To ancient ears, that resonance wasn't just sound, it was communication. Some said the stones captured the voices of ancestors, their wisdom trapped in the rock, waiting to be summoned. Others believed they were doorways to the otherworld, where a sharp clap or the right chant could pry open the veil between the living and the dead. The rituals were precise. A traveler seeking guidance might kneel at dawn, press their lips to the cold surface, and murmur a question into the stone. Then, with a careful strike, often using a special hammerstone passed down through generations, the rock would answer. The pitch, the duration of the echo, even the direction it seemed to come from, all were clues to be interpreted by those who knew how to listen. A short, sharp ring might signal warning, while a long, low hum could mean approval. Some stones were said to sing entire phrases if struck in sequence, their tones forming a language lost to time. But the knowledge of where these stones stood, how to wake them, and what their echoes meant, that's faded like frost under morning sun. Many of the stones are still there, silent now, their secrets buried with the last keepers of the old ways. Farmers plow around them, unaware that the odd, resonant boulder in their field was once a sacred hotline to the unseen. Archaeologists have tested a few, confirming that their unique mineral compositions do produce unusual echoes, but science can't explain why certain ones were chosen, or why some seem to amplify sound in ways that defy physics. Today, the few remaining stones with known locations are curiosities. Tourists tap them half-heartedly, disappointed when they hear only a dull thud. Without the rituals, the chants, the belief that something listened back, they're just rocks. Yet on quiet evenings, when the wind dies down and the light slants just right, locals still tell stories of the stones that once sang. Some swear that if you press your ear close and strike at exactly the right angle, you can almost hear it, not an echo but something softer, like a sigh trapped in the quartz. Whether it's the wind, the earth settling, or something older and far stranger, no one can say. The stones keep their secrets, leaving us to wonder, were the ancients hearing voices we've forgotten how to recognize, or were they listening to something we've yet to discover? The hills stay silent, but the question lingers, as persistent as the mist. In the gardens of ancient Persia, where rose petals drifted on warm breezes and poets whispered verses to the stars, music wasn't always made by hand. Sometimes it was composed by the wind itself. Towering harps, their strings painstakingly tuned to intervals said to mirror celestial harmonies, were placed in open arches and courtyards, transforming every gust into a symphony. These weren't mere instruments, they were conduits, their melodies believed to carry whispers from the divine. Sufi mystics would sit for hours, eyes closed, interpreting the random plucks and hums as coded guidance. A high, trembling note might signal impending fortune, while a deep, resonant thrum could warn of unseen trials ahead. Each harp was a living thing, its voice shaped by the hour. Dawn winds teased out delicate scales, afternoon gales summoned bold chords, and twilight zephyrs drew out lingering sighs that faded into the gathering dark. The craft of these wind harps was as precise as it was poetic. Artisans selected wood aged in mountain air, carved tuning pegs from apricot tree resin, and strung the instruments with gut sourced from sheep that grazed on sacred hillsides. The placement was just as crucial. A harp positioned where northern and western winds collided might produce harmonies no human musician could replicate, a phenomenon poets called the sky's improvisation. Even the strings had meaning. The lowest, thickest chord represented the earth's groan, the highest the cry of a falcon circling the sun. Together, they formed a scale that mirrored the universe's own vibrations, or so the masters claimed. Yet by the 19th century, the harps had begun to fall silent. European-style conservatories prized structured compositions over the wind's whimsy, and modern instruments drowned out their ethereal tones. The last master harp makers took their tuning secrets to the grave, leaving behind only a handful of neglected relics in museum corners, their strings snapped or slack with age. Today, a few experimental musicians try to recreate their sound, but without the sacred geometry of their placement or the devotional intent behind their notes, the music feels hollow, a shadow of what once was. What's haunting isn't just the loss of the harps themselves, but the philosophy they embodied. In a world obsessed with control, they were a surrender, an acknowledgement that beauty could arise from unpredictability, that art didn't require an artist's hand, only their willingness to listen. The winds still blow through Persia's ruins, still capable of song if any harp stood ready to catch them. But the silence lingers, heavy with unplayed melodies, a reminder that some harmonies weren't meant to be owned, only borrowed briefly from the air itself. Deep in the Carpathian valleys, when winter's grip began to loosen, Romanian villages erupted in a riot of carved wood and clanging bells. Men transformed into creatures neither fully human nor beast, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks adorned with tufts of horsehair and spiraling horns. These weren't costumes, they were talismans, donned each spring to shake the earth awake. The rituals were chaos with purpose. Dancers leaping over fires to purify the soil, masked figures dragging plows through the streets to mock the coming labor, while others cracked whips to split the air like thunder, scaring off spirits that might blight the crops. The masks themselves held power. Some bore the grimace of the Moroi, undead thirsting for the harvest's vitality, while others mirrored the benign gaze of Sanzian fairy maidens who blessed the fields with dew. This was no simple performance. Every snarl carved into oak, every stitch of wool sewn into fringe followed patterns centuries old. Elders whispered that certain masks could only be worn by those with unbroken family lines, their blood a tether to the ancestors who first danced them. The timing was just as sacred. The festival straddled the old Julian calendar's thresholds, moments when the veil between worlds thinned. Even the church tolerated the revelry, folding it into Lenten observances, a rare harmony between cross and sickle. Now the masks gather dust in attics. Tractor engines have replaced the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Pesticides do the work once entrusted to symbolic violence against the unseen. A few villages keep the tradition alive for tourists, but the urgency is gone. The dancers no longer truly believe their leaps dictate the wheat's height. Ethnographers document the surviving masks, noting how their exaggerated features, protruding tongues, bulging eyes mirror Iron Age artifacts, hinting at a lineage far older than recorded history. The loss cuts deeper than folklore. These festivals were a dialogue with the land, an acknowledgement that survival hinged on more than seed and rain. When the last masked dancer hangs up his bells, something more than a tradition fades. It's the severing of a thread that once tied humanity to the turning seasons, a reminder that fertility wasn't just chemistry, but a pact with forces we've long since stopped naming. The fields may still yield, but who's left to thank the spirits or apologize when the plow cuts too deep? In the quiet corners of old Japanese homes, where the scent of tatami mats mingled with incense, slips of paper once held more power than locks or guards. These were the ofuda, delicate Shinto charms inscribed with sacred calligraphy, each stroke believed to channel the kami, the spirits that danced in winds and rivers. Priests folded blessings into the fibers, their brushes moving with the precision of surgeons as they traced ancient kanji for protection, health, or prosperity. The charms weren't merely decorative, they were thresholds where the divine brushed against the everyday. A farmer might pin one above his door to shield his harvest from storms, while a mother tucked another into her child's sash before a long journey, trusting the paper's whisper-thin strength to turn aside unseen dangers. The artistry was in the details. Some ofuda glowed with vermilion ink, vibrant as a maple leaf in autumn, while others were stamped with cryptic sigils only priests could fully decipher. The paper itself was ritual handmade from mulberry bark, its uneven edges a reminder of nature's imperfect grace. Families renewed their charms each year, the old ones burned in purifying flames, their ashes carrying last year's woes into the sky. To touch an ofuda was to touch a covenant, a promise that the universe still noticed, still cared. Yet today, the shelves of temples grow emptier. Synthetic stickers replace hand-brushed charms, convenience trumps ceremony. Modern apartments with their sleek steel doors have no space for fragile paper talismans, and the generations who once trembled at the thought of offending the kami now worry more about Wi-Fi signals than wandering spirits. A few traditionalists still cling to the practice, but even their ofuda often come pre-printed, the strokes uniform and lifeless, lacking the urgency of a priest's trembling hand as he poured his belief into the brush. What's lost isn't just the objects, but the intimacy of the ritual, the way a family might gather to receive their new charm, the hush as the priest explained its placement, the unspoken understanding that some dangers required more than bolts or alarms. Science scoffs at the idea of paper warding off misfortune, but psychology whispers a truth. There's comfort in symbols, in the act of naming fears and facing them with something tangible. The ofuda didn't just protect, they reminded. Their slow fade mirrors a quieter, vanishing, the loss of small, sacred pauses in a world that no longer has time for whispered prayers or paper-thin faith. The ink may fade, but the question lingers. When we stopped believing the charm could shield us, did we forget how to believe we were worth shielding at all? The ocean breeze carries whispers through the towering coral ruins of Nan Madol, where massive stone logs, each weighing as much as an elephant, balance precariously atop one another without mortar or cement. Across Micronesia, these haunting structures rise from tidal flats and jungle shores, their black basalt columns stacked like some ancient child's game. But this was no accident of nature. Centuries ago, islanders shaped these monoliths with stone tools, transporting them miles across open water on rafts made of bamboo, then fitting them together with a precision that defies logic. The legends speak of magic, rulers who commanded the rocks to fly, or gods who softened the stone like clay. The truth is even more astonishing. Survivors describe a lost engineering art where builders tapped the coral's natural porosity, selecting stones that locked together under their own weight. They shaped each piece like a puzzle, using tidal patterns to float slabs into place during high water, then letting the receding sea settle them into perfect alignment. The structures weren't just tombs or temples, they were living maps. Certain walls aligned with solstice sunrises, others echoed the sound of waves in hidden chambers, creating eerie harmonics said to summon ancestral spirits. The knowledge was passed mouth to ear, a sacred trust between master and apprentice. Then came the rupture. Colonial powers dismissed the sites as primitive curiosities. Missionaries toppled some towers, repurposing the stones for churches. With no written records, the techniques vanished as swiftly as the islanders who mastered them. Today, archaeologists scratch their heads over how blocks cut with coral tools show smoother edges than modern saws could achieve. Divers still find lost stones half submerged in lagoons, abandoned mid-journey centuries ago. The descendants of the builders sometimes visit, running fingers over the grooves, but the language of the stones is silent now. What's chilling isn't the mystery of how they were built, but why we stopped believing they could be. Modern engineers reconstruct the process with cranes and computers, missing the point entirely. These weren't just feats of strength, but of intimacy. The builders didn't conquer the coral, they conversed with it, understanding its tides, its fractures, its hidden symmetries. The ruins stand as both monument and indictment, proof that the greatest structures aren't made by forcing nature into submission, but by listening to its oldest rhythms. The waves still lick at the foundations, as if waiting for someone to remember how to listen back. Among the rolling hills of England, where moss clings to crumbling stone, some wells hold more than water, they cradle echoes of the future. Pilgrims once knelt by these whispering wells, their lips trembling with questions as they waited for the wind to stir the depths into speech. The most famous, St. Madron's well in Cornwall was said to answer lovers' pleas with sighs that rippled the surface, while the ancient well at Woolpit murmured warnings in gurgles only the village elder could decipher. The rituals were precise, a silver pin dropped into the water at dawn, a whispered question timed to the gust that always came just before noon. Some swore the wells didn't just predict the future, they bargained with it, trading favors for glimpses of fate. A farmer might leave a lock of his child's hair to learn if the harvest would survive the blight. A soldier would offer his dagger's hilt to hear whether war would claim him. Science scoffs now, attributing the whispers to underground currents or the peculiar acoustics of limestone channels, but the old records tell stranger tales. In the 1500s, a chronicler described how the well at Walsingham spoke in syllables to a nun, foretelling the fall of her abbey years before Henry VIII's men arrived with torches. Another account from the 1700s claims a well in Yorkshire gushed blood-red water the night before a local lord was murdered, though no dye or mineral trace was ever found. Whether trick of nature or something older, the wells were treated as living oracles, their stone rims worn smooth by generations of hands gripping the edge, leaning closer, desperate to hear. Now the wells are forgotten. Tourists snap photos of their mossy mouths without pausing to listen. Fences keep the curious from tossing coins into the shallow puddles below. A few still bear the scars of their sacred past, crude carvings of eyes or mouths near the waterline, grooves where ropes once lowered offerings deep into the dark. The wind still blows, of course, rushing through the same cracks and hollows that once shaped it into prophecy. But without believers to translate, the whispers dissolve into noise, just another sound lost in the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of cars. Perhaps the wells never held real magic, only the reflection of human hope, the universal longing to bend time's rigid path, or perhaps they're waiting, silent as ever, for someone to ask the right question in exactly the right way when the wind is poised to answer. The water remains, holding its secrets like a closed book, its pages swollen with all the futures it's no longer asked to tell. In the heart of Uganda, where the bark of the mutuba tree peels away in thick, fibrous sheets, the Baganda people once performed an alchemy of patience and precision, transforming something as ordinary as bark into cloth fit for kings. For centuries, artisans harvested the inner layers during the rainy season, when the sap ran rich, beating the strips for hours with wooden mallets until they softened into a material as supple as leather. The process was slow, rhythmic, a meditation passed from grandfather to grandson, each hammer strike embedding stories into the fibers. The resulting fabric, called bark cloth, wasn't just material, it was a living archive. Kings wore it during coronations, draped in its russet hues like the earth itself had crowned them. Brides wrapped themselves in its folds for weddings, the cloth absorbing their vows like ink. Even in death, the departed were swathed in its embrace, a final layer between body and ancestor. But the Mutuba trees are silent now. The hammers that once echoed through villages have been replaced by the whir of sewing machines, the bark cloth traded for cheap, colorful synthetics shipped from distant factories. A few elders still remember the techniques: how to score the bark in perfect spirals so it wouldn't kill the tree, how to dye the cloth with crushed roots that bled deep indigo into the fibers. Museums display fragments behind glass, their labels calling it primitive craft, missing the irony. It's our modern world that's brute in its haste, devouring resources without thought for renewal. The Mutuba still grows, its bark peeling in great curls, but no one comes to collect it. The knowledge of which trees to harvest, when to strike, how to listen for the exact moment the fibers yield, these subtleties are evaporating like morning mist. What's lost isn't just a textile, but a language of reciprocity. The Baganda didn't just take from the tree, they spoke to it, pruning with care so it would heal and yield again in years to come. The cloth carried the tree's breath, the sweat of the beater's brow, the weight of history in every threadbare fold. Today, fast fashion piles up in landfills, but the Mutuba's unused bark rots where it falls. Perhaps the tragedy isn't that the cloth disappeared, but that we forgot its lesson that some things must be made slowly, with hands that remember their debt to the earth. The trees haven't stopped giving, we've simply forgotten how to ask. The North Sea's fury was no match for the voices that rose above it, deep, guttural chants that seemed to slice through the howling winds like a blade through sailcloth. Along the fjords of ancient Scandinavia, storm callers stood on jagged cliffs, their arms outstretched, singing not to the clouds, but to the very currents of air itself. These seers, known as estigeonted storm interpreters, weren't just predicting the weather, they claimed to bend it to their will. Their rituals were precise, iron amulets warmed over fires until they glowed, runes carved into whalebone and cast into the surf, and melodies so resonant they vibrated in the chests of those who listened. When a Viking fleet faced a sudden squall, it wasn't the rudder they trusted first, it was the storm caller's voice, rising in a cadence that mimicked the rolling thunder, a sonic tether between the human and the elemental. But how much of this was myth, and how much was something far older? Modern meteorologists scoff at the idea of weather control, yet sailors' logs tell eerie tales. One account from the 12th century describes a estigeonted halting a tempest mid-voyage by singing a single, sustained note, a feat that left the crew trembling. Another tells of a storm summoned on demand to drive off pursuing enemies, the winds shifting as if on command. Science offers fragile explanations. Perhaps the chants exploited acoustic resonance in coastal caves, triggering pressure changes. Or maybe the seers were simply masters of observation, reading subtle signs, a shift in cloud texture, the scent of salt sharpening, long before the storm's arrival. But even skeptics can't dismiss the uncanny accuracy of their predictions, preserved in rune stones that tally successful voyages like notches on a sword. Then came the compass, the sextant, the radio tools that rendered the storm callers obsolete. The old chants faded, dismissed as primitive superstition, their practitioners ridiculed as charlatans or madmen. Yet something lingers in the coastal villages where their descendants still live. Fishermen speak of hearing fragmented melodies on the wind when storms brew, though no one stands on the cliffs to sing them. Linguists have reconstructed a handful of the chants from ancient texts, but without the context, the iron amulets, the timing of the tides, the unshakable belief that the sea would listen their just words. The truth may lie somewhere between legend and physics. Storm calling wasn't just about controlling nature. It was a dialogue with it, an acknowledgement that humans were neither masters nor victims of the elements, but participants in a vast living system. The sea hasn't forgotten those voices. On nights when the waves slam against the rocks with unnatural rhythm, or when the wind carries a tune too structured to be random, it's hard not to wonder, were the storm callers tapping into a force we've since drowned out with technology? The cliffs still stand, empty now, their echoes a reminder that some alliances with the natural world were never meant to be broken. Under the blistering Saharan sun, where shifting sands erase all traces of passage, the earth still remembers the weight of 1,000,000 footsteps. For over 1,000 years, camel caravans snaked across the dunes in staggering lines that stretched beyond the horizon, each beast laden with gleaming white slabs of salt, the white gold that built kingdoms. The Tuareg traders who led these expeditions carried no maps. Their charts were written in the stars above and the subtle contours of the desert below. A barely perceptible dip in the terrain might signal an underground spring. A peculiar rock formation could mark the halfway point to Timbuktu. These salt roads were more than trade routes. They were living libraries of survival where every grain of sand held a story. The caravans moved with celestial precision. Navigators timed their journeys by the position of the Pleiades, stopping only during the day's fiercest heat when the desert itself seemed to exhale fire. At night, they read the wind-carved ripples in the sand like a language, understanding that certain patterns meant approaching storms or hidden quicksand. The salt itself was currency in medieval West Africa, pound for pound. It could trade equally with gold. Mansa Musa, the legendary Malian emperor whose wealth once crashed gold markets in Cairo, built his fortune on these very routes. But the true treasure wasn't the salt, it was the knowledge of how to traverse a sea of sand without drowning. Now, the old ways are vanishing beneath truck tires and satellite-guided convoys. Modern highways slice through the desert, rendering the ancient landmarks obsolete. Younger generations, armed with GPS, no longer memorize the stories whispered by the wind. Yet fragments persist. Elders in remote oases still recount how a single caravan could take 3 weeks to cross the Tainsruft, the land of thirst, guided only by the bones of camels that didn't make it. Archaeologists sometimes stumble upon ghostly traces, a rusted sword hilt, a child's leather sandal, or a carefully stacked cairn of rocks that once pointed the way to safety. What's unsettling isn't just the loss of the routes, but the erasure of an entire philosophy of travel. The Tuareg didn't conquer the desert, they conversed with it, moving in harmony with its moods rather than imposing their will. Today's air-conditioned trucks barrel through sandstorms their drivers barely notice, oblivious to the subtle signs that once meant life or death. The Sahara keeps its secrets, burying the old roads grain by grain, as if protecting them from a world that no longer understands their value. The stars still shine as brightly over the dunes, but there are few left who know how to ask them for directions. In the flickering candlelight of Byzantium's hidden chambers, polished discs of bronze and silver held more than mere reflections. They were windows to what lay ahead. The mirror readers of Constantinople didn't just gaze idly at their own faces. They sought the faces of emperors yet to reign, battles yet to be fought, even plagues creeping silently across the horizon. These weren't parlor tricks, but sacred sciences requiring rituals as precise as a surgeon's hand. The mirrors had to be cast during specific phases of the moon, their surfaces smoothed with crushed pearls mixed into the alloy to enhance their receptivity. When the time came to scry, the mystics would position the mirror at an exact angle often calculated by star charts, so that it caught not just light but the elusive shimmer between worlds. The chants they whispered were no ordinary prayers. Each syllable was tuned to vibrate at frequencies believed to ripple the fabric of time itself, pulling fragments of the future into focus like fish surfacing in a still pond. Historical fragments describe how one seer, the famed Alexandros of Trebizond, foretold the fall of an emperor by glimpsing his reflection splintered into 7 shards, a vision dismissed as madness until the ruler was overthrown by 7 conspirators months later. Another account tells of a mirror that clouded over with what looked like smoke, only for Constantinople to burn in a great fire weeks later. The accuracy of these prophecies was said to hinge on the purity of the scryer's intent. Greed or ambition would distort the visions, turning them into grotesque parodies of truth. Yet by the time the Ottomans breached the city's walls, the art had already begun to fade. The mirrors were too often conflated with heresy, their practitioners driven underground or forced to destroy their tools. A few survived, hidden in monastery vaults or passed down through families, but without the precise incantations and celestial alignments, they became mere curiosities. Modern scholars who have examined the surviving mirrors note their unusual composition traces of mercury and other metals that, under the right lighting, could produce eerie optical effects. But were these chemical quirks the secret, or did they merely facilitate something far harder to quantify? Today, the few intact Byzantine mirrors hang in museums, their surfaces scratched with age, reflecting only the faces of tourists who glance at them and move on. No one remembers the words that once made the metal tremble, or the exact angle to hold the disc so that the light bent just so. The future they once revealed is now the past we study, leaving us to wonder, were the visions real or simply the product of desperate hope meeting clever craftsmanship? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between, not in the mirror's surface, but in the space where the observer's belief once bridged the gap between what was and what might be. The metal remains cold and silent, keeping its secrets as closely as it once kept the faces of tomorrow. The night sky above Thailand's riverbanks once shimmered with more than stars. Thousands of lanterns, fragile as moth wings, rose in silent procession, each flame a flickering prayer set adrift on the wind. These weren't mere decorations, they were vessels carrying the weight of human longing into the heavens. Made of rice paper and bamboo, their construction was itself a meditation. Families gathered to stretch the delicate sheets, their hands moving with reverence as if the act of folding the lantern's edges could press their hopes into the very fibers. The moment of release was sacred, a whispered wish for a sick child's recovery, the memory of a departed ancestor, or a plea for the rains to come, all entrusted to the fire's upward journey. The lanterns didn't just ascend, they transformed, their glow shrinking to pinpricks against the dark, as if the sky were absorbing their stories, but the ritual's roots ran deeper than spectacle. Ancient texts describe how the lanterns were timed to lunar cycles, their release coinciding with nights when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Certain villages believed the lantern's paths held omens. A swift, straight rise meant the gods were listening, while a flickering, wayward light signaled unseen obstacles ahead. The colors, too, carried meaning: gold for prosperity, red for courage, white for purity. In the northern Lanna kingdom, masters of the craft would inscribe tiny symbols onto the lantern's sides: a lotus for enlightenment, a twisting vine for resilience, hidden messages meant only for the divine. Today, the skies still fill with light during festivals like Yi Peng, but the intimacy has faded. Tourists snap selfies as mass-produced lanterns are launched by the hundreds, their flames fueled by curiosity rather than conviction. The paper is often thicker, less likely to burn away completely, a small change but one that alters the ritual's essence. Traditionally, the lantern's disintegration was symbolic. The fire consumed the vessel, leaving no trace, just as prayers were meant to dissolve into the universe, unanswered but unresisted. Now, lanterns frequently land half-charred in trees or rivers, their unfinished journeys littering the landscape like discarded drafts of wishes. Is the magic lost or merely changing? Some monks and elders strive to preserve the old ways, teaching children the proper chants and the significance of each fold. Scientists, too, have taken interest studying how the lantern's heat currents mimic natural phenomena, or how their collective rise creates a temporary constellation of human intent. Perhaps the lanterns still hold power even if their handlers no longer understand it. When the last ember winks out high above, it leaves behind a question. Does a prayer lose its meaning when the language is forgotten, or does the act of release itself retain some sacred geometry, some echo of the belief that once set it alight? The night doesn't answer. It simply cradles the lights as it always has, indifferent to whether they carry devotion or mere delight, a reminder that some mysteries rise beyond explanation, burning bright until they vanish into the unknown. The wind howls across the Siberian tundra, slicing through the few remaining ice tombs that stand like frozen sentinels against time. For generations, the Nenets and other nomadic tribes laid their most revered shamans to rest in these glacial vaults, believing the eternal cold would preserve not just their bodies but their connection to the spirit world. The tombs were no simple graves, they were intricate sanctuaries. Walls carved with spiraling symbols told of journeys to the underworld. Antlers arranged in perfect circles mapped celestial patterns. Leather pouches holding sacred herbs rested near the shaman's head, their scent sealed in by the ice. Every detail held meaning, a frozen lexicon of beliefs about life, death, and the delicate balance between. Now the permafrost weeps. Rising temperatures melt the tombs faster than archaeologists can document them, liquefying centuries of wisdom in days. One researcher described finding a tomb where the ice had retreated just enough to reveal a shaman's face, preserved with such startling clarity that the tattoos curling across his cheeks looked freshly inked. By the next morning, the features had slumped into unrecognizable slurry, the tattoos dissolving like ink in water. The loss isn't just physical, it's the erasure of an entire spiritual dialogue. The carvings that once guided the dead to the afterlife now drip into mud, their messages blurring beyond recovery. What haunts the most isn't the vanishing of the tombs themselves, but the silencing of the questions they might have answered. Why did certain shamans wear masks of beaten copper, while others were wrapped in reindeer skins stitched with wolf teeth? What songs were meant to be sung when the ice finally released a shaman's spirit? The tribes who built these tombs rarely wrote their histories, they froze them, trusting the land to keep their stories safe. Now, as the thaw accelerates, we're left with fragments, a half-melted drum, a sodden bundle of feathers, a carving of a bear that stops mid-pour, its meaning cut short by the meltwater's rise. Scientists scramble to preserve what they can, using 3D scanners to capture carvings before they vanish. But technology can't replicate the context. A digitized mask might show every scratch and patina, but it can't convey why it was placed facing east or how the shaman's breath fogged the metal in sacred rituals. The permafrost held more than bodies, it held the weight of centuries of listening to the crackle of the aurora, the whispers of ancestors, the pulse of the land itself. As the ice retreats, it takes with it the last echoes of those who knew how to hear the tundra speak. The earth warms, the tombs collapse, and the frost surrenders its guardians at last, not with a roar, but with a slow, silent drip, as if mourning the secrets it can no longer keep. Standing tall in the misty fjords of Sweden and Norway, rune stones jut from the earth like frozen sentinels, their surfaces etched with jagged symbols that once pulsed with meaning. These weren't mere markers. To the Vikings, they were conduits between worlds, carved with spells to protect travelers, curses to punish thieves, or verses to immortalize the dead. Each rune was more than a letter. It was a vessel of power shaped to channel the will of gods and mortals alike. The very act of inscribing them was sacred. Iron chisels struck in precise sequences, the carver's breath mingling with the stone dust as whispers of incantations sealed the symbols into permanence. But the voices behind these stones have been stifled. When Christianity swept through Scandinavia, waves of missionaries toppled or defaced thousands of rune stones, recarving crosses over old gods' names or smashing them into rubble for church foundations. Some were repurposed as baking slabs or stepping stones, their curses and prayers ground underfoot for centuries. The few that survived often did so by accident, hidden in bogs, buried under farmland, or simply overlooked because their runes had weathered into near invisibility. Even the stones that remain are shrouded in mystery. Modern linguists can translate the runes themselves, but the deeper layers evade us. A phrase like, "May Thor hallow these runes," might be straightforward, but the accompanying symbols, twisting serpents, interlacing knots, hold coded meanings now lost. Some stones were placed at ley line intersections, their positions aligning with solstice sunrises. Others bore silent runes, intentionally garbled markings meant to confuse evil spirits. Without the oral traditions that once accompanied them, these stones are like songs, missing their melodies, the lyrics intact, but the music gone, the greatest irony. Many rune stones were meant to defy time. Phrases like, "This stone will stand while the world endures," or "No man shall erase my words," pulse with defiance, yet their creators couldn't foresee how thoroughly interpretation would fade. Today, tourists trace the carvings with curious fingers, oblivious to the curses they might be invoking or the dead they might be summoning. Archaeologists debate whether a particular swirl denotes a battle or a burial, while neo-pagans attempt to revive the old chants, piecing together fragments like a shattered mosaic. What lingers isn't just the physical stone, but the weight of what's been severed, the moment when a thriving tradition of storytelling, magic, and memory was cut adrift. The runes endure, yes, but they speak in riddles we've forgotten how to untangle. Perhaps that's the final lesson of these monoliths, that even the boldest attempts to outlast time are at the mercy of those who come after. The stones remain, but the hands that knew how to make them sing have long turned to dust, leaving us to wonder what whispers might still cling to the grooves if we knew how to listen. In the bustling souks of old Damascus, silk wasn't just fabric, it was a language. The city's master weavers wielded their shuttles like poets, threading secrets into every inch of shimmering cloth. A lotus motif might conceal a lover's plea, while interlocking diamonds spelled out a merchant's hidden inventory. Even the colors held meaning: indigo for trust, saffron for danger, crimson for a promise sworn in blood. To the untrained eye, these were mere textiles. To those who knew the code, they were maps, contracts, even encrypted letters passed beneath the noses of prying rulers. The craft was born of necessity. When speech could be treason, silk became the safest whisper. The looms themselves were marvels of ingenuity. Some wove double-sided patterns, where the front displayed flowers for casual observers, while the reverse revealed snarling wolves to initiates. Others used a technique called float weaving, where threads skipped layers to form invisible words only legible when held to the light. The weavers guarded their methods fiercely, passing them mother to daughter in hushed tones, their hands moving with the precision of scribes penning forbidden manuscripts. A single bolt of Damascene silk could carry the fate of a dynasty in its folds. Then came the unraveling. Cheaper imports flooded the markets, mechanized looms replaced artisanal ones, and the slow, sacred art of encoded weaving dwindled. The last true masters took their ciphers to the grave, leaving behind stacks of unsold fabric in empty workshops. Today, surviving fragments hang in museums, their patterns admired for aesthetics alone, the urgent messages they once carried now mute as the looms that birthed them. Scholars squint at magnified photos, trying to reverse engineer the codes, but without the key. It's like decoding a symphony by studying its shadows. What's haunting isn't just the loss of the craft, but the silencing of a unique form of intimacy. These weavers didn't just create beauty, they spun trust into tangible form, wrapping secrets in something as delicate as a scarf or as grand as a wedding gown. Modern encryption thrives in ones and zeros, but it lacks the tactile poetry of a danger warning stitched into the hem of a robe. The silk still shimmers when the light catches it just right, but the stories are gone dissolved like the echoes of a conversation in a crowded marketplace, leaving only the faintest impression of what once was spoken. High in the thin air of the Andes, where clouds cling to mountain peaks like wisps of forgotten prophecy, the last cloud readers still lift their faces to the sky, but fewer and fewer understand what the heavens are saying. For centuries, Quechua and Aymara elders could decipher the language of vapor and wind, reading the swirls and textures of passing clouds as clearly as a farmer reads the ripeness of fruit. A mackerel sky at dawn might warn of afternoon hailstorms, while mare's tails stretching toward the east signaled 3 days of dry heat knowledge that dictated when to plant potatoes, when to drive llamas to higher pastures, or when to take shelter before the mountain unleashed its fury. This was no vague intuition. The cloud readers' forecasts were astonishingly precise, honed through generations of unbroken observation. Certain elders could predict rainfall down to the hour by studying how mist curled around specific peaks, or interpret the color of twilight clouds to gauge the severity of coming frost. The science was oral, passed down through chants and stories that encoded meteorological wisdom into myth. A tale about a fox chasing the moon might secretly teach the signs of an El Niño shift, while a children's rhyme about condors carried clues to wind patterns. The sky was their library, the clouds its living pages. Then came the satellites. Modern weather models with their Doppler radars and algorithms rendered the cloud readers' skills quaint at best, superstitious at worst. Younger generations, glued to smartphone forecasts, no longer bother to learn the old ways. Why memorize the shape of cumulus when an app can tell you the exact minute rain will fall? Yet something vital has been lost in this trade. Indigenous forecasts weren't just about prediction, they were about relationship. A satellite image shows a storm system moving, but it can't tell you how that storm will behave on the particular slopes of your valley, or which highland crops are vulnerable to its microclimates. The cloud readers knew their mountains like old friends, understanding how each ridge and gully twisted the weather to its own logic. Today, the few remaining practitioners are living archives of a dying art. Scientists who bother to consult them are often startled by the accuracy of their traditional methods, how an elder's prediction of a late frost aligns perfectly with soil temperature data, or how their warning of drought matches emerging climate patterns. But without apprentices to carry the knowledge forward, these human barometers are fading into the mist. The clouds still drift over the Andes, shifting into the same formations they've held for millennia. Only now, there's no one left to translate their silent stories. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't that the forecasts were wrong, but that we stopped looking up long enough to realize how much they still had to teach us. The sky hasn't stopped speaking, we've simply forgotten how to listen. Deep in the jungles of northern Vietnam, where monsoon rains lash the emerald valleys, bronze drums once pulsed with a power beyond music. These weren't mere instruments, they were talismans, their surfaces etched with frogs poised to leap, herons mid-flight, and spirals that mirrored the whirl of storms. Cast over 2,000 years ago using methods still not fully understood, the Dong Son drums were so precise, so resonant, that their beats could carry for miles, vibrating through the earth itself. When struck at the right rhythm, elders claimed the drums could pull rain from stubborn skies or send malevolent spirits fleeing into the darkness. The rituals were as intricate as the drum's designs. During droughts, villagers would gather at water's edge, their best musicians striking the drum's tympanum with a mallet wrapped in sacred cloth. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, a low, rolling thunder that seemed to climb into the clouds. Certain patterns mimicked the cadence of downpours, a sonic invitation for the heavens to mirror the earth. Other times, the drums played at funerals, their vibrations guiding souls through the veils of the afterlife. the bronze acting as both compass and gatekeeper. The symbols held layers of meaning, radiating sunbursts for prosperity, overlapping circles for eternity, and those ubiquitous frogs fertility deities whose presence promised abundant harvest. Yet today, the drums sit silent in museum cases, their sacred songs reduced to scholarly speculation. Modern Vietnam still honors them as cultural icons, but the old prayers, the precise rhythms that once stirred storms, have faded like whispers in the wind. A few ethnic minorities in the highlands preserve fragments of the traditions, though even their rituals are shadows of what once was. Scientists have analyzed the bronze alloy, a mix of copper, tin, and traces of lead that gave the drums their otherworldly resonance, but no lab can replicate the intent behind each strike. Archaeologists pore over the patterns, debating whether the herons represent actual migrations or astral pathways, while tourists tap the drum's surfaces lightly, oblivious to the storms those hands could once summon. What's lost isn't just the music, but the conversation it enabled between earth and sky, living and dead, the seen and unseen. The drums still exist, yes, but without the hands that knew how to speak their language, they're little more than metal shells. Perhaps the most haunting part isn't the silence, but the lingering question. Were the drums ever truly just instruments, or were they something far older, a technology of the sacred we've forgotten how to wield? The bronze remains cold and waiting, its secrets coiled tight in the echoes it no longer produces. The jungles still tremble with rain, but no one remembers the rhythms that once called it down. Under the velvet cloak of a Persian night, where stars scattered like crushed pearls across the sky, nobles once wandered gardens designed to vanish by dawn. These weren't just flower beds, they were living canvases painted in moonlight, where jasmine and white oleander opened their petals only after sunset, their pale blooms glowing like scattered coins against dark foliage. Reflective pools doubled the celestial spectacle, turning a single cherry tree into a constellation of floating petals. The air hummed with night-blooming cereus, its perfume so potent it could dizzy the senses, while pathways lined with crushed quartz glittered like stolen starlight underfoot. This was the Moon Garden, a sanctuary where day's clamor gave way to the hush of shadows, where time moved to the rhythm of nocturnal blossoms unfurling. The gardeners who shaped these spaces were alchemists of twilight. They understood that color wasn't just pigment, it was perception. By day, the same flowers looked wan and ordinary, their magic muted under the sun's glare. But by night, the silvered foliage of lamb's ear became a tactile echo of moonlight, while the delicate cups of evening primrose seemed to collect luminescence like water. Even the soundscape was curated, trickling fountains tuned to a soothing pitch, wind chimes hung at intervals to mimic the distant calls of night birds. Visitors would recline on low divans, sipping rosewater sherbet as the garden's illusions wove around them every flicker of petal, every ripple in the pool, a silent dialogue between earth and sky. Yet the garden's very impermanence became their undoing. As Persia modernized, tastes shifted toward displays that dazzled in daylight vibrant tulips, sun-drunk roses catering to colonial visitors who dismissed the moon gardens as mere oddities. The subtle art of nocturnal horticulture withered. Night bloomers were uprooted in favor of flowers that didn't hide their splendor while the world was awake. Today, historians pore over ancient manuscripts describing these gardens, marveling at the meticulous notes on lunar phases and bloom cycles. Botanists confirm that many of the plants once used, like the ghostly Epiphyllum oxypetalum, which flowers for a single night each year, still exist, but the knowledge of how to orchestrate them into a living nocturne has frayed. What vanished with these gardens wasn't just beauty, but a way of seeing. In a world that now prizes constant visibility floodlit monuments, screens that never sleep, the moon gardens celebrated the poetry of what thrives in half-light. They taught that some wonders demand patience, that brilliance isn't always loud, and that darkness can be a canvas rather than a void. The quartz pathways may still catch the moonlight, but no one walks them now, leaving the night to reclaim its flowers in silence. Perhaps the true loss isn't the gardens themselves, but the reminder they offered, that sometimes the most extraordinary things bloom only when we're willing to step into the dark. The cedar plank shivers under the bite of an otter's tooth, not a metaphor, but a tool as precise as any sculptor's chisel. For generations, Haida artisans along the misty coasts of the Pacific Northwest shaped wood with the very canines of the sea creatures they revered, each stroke guided by centuries of tradition. These weren't crude instruments, they were extensions of the spirit world, their edges honed to a razor's sharpness, capable of teasing out the faintest details in a totem's curve or a mask's hollow eyes. The teeth themselves were sacred, harvested with rituals that honored the otter's sacrifice, their natural curvature lending an organic rhythm to the carver's hand. To work with them was to enter a dialogue between human and animal, land and sea, where every groove in the wood held the echo of a shared story. But the teeth carried more than sharpness, they carried memory. Elders speak of how the otter's spirit lingered in the tool, subtly guiding the carver's motions. A twist of the wrist here, a shallower cut, their decisions that seemed instinctual but were whispered by something older than human artistry. The resulting carvings pulsed with this collaboration. A raven's wings might arch just so, mimicking the otter's dive into waves, or a bear's snarl would curve like the tooth that carved it. Even the wood responded differently to these tools, the grain parting more cleanly under organic edges than steel, leaving surfaces that gleamed like wet stone under rain. Then came the knives, factory-made blades, uniform and predictable, severed the link between artisan and medium. Suddenly, anyone could carve, no need to understand the otter's ways, no rituals to learn, no patience required to hone teeth into tools. Efficiency triumphed, and the old methods faded like tide lines in the sand. Today's Haida carvers still produce breathtaking work, but something intangible vanished when the teeth were retired. Modern chisels can replicate the shapes, but not the spirit the way a tooth might catch on a knot in the wood, forcing the carver to adapt, to listen, to let the material guide the art rather than dominate it. Perhaps the loss isn't just about technique, but about humility. The otter's tooth was a reminder that artistry wasn't about mastery over nature, but partnership with it. Now, the few surviving tooth-carved works in museums seem to hum with a quiet energy, their lines fluid where modern tools leave edges rigid. The wood, once alive, then shaped by something that also lived, holds onto that conversation. But the hands that knew how to listen have grown fewer, and the teeth themselves, once bridges between worlds, now lie silent in forgotten boxes, their secrets tucked away like the final notes of a song only the cedar remembers. Along the misty shores of the Baltic Sea, where waves toss golden flecks of resin onto the sand like forgotten gifts, the ancient tribes held a truth that modern science would only confirm millennia later. Amber was never just a stone. To the Curonians and Prussians who combed these beaches, each nugget was a fragment of the sun itself, hardened into earthly form by some divine alchemy. They carved these luminous pieces into amulets shaped like crescent moons and coiled serpents, each curve designed to trap not just light, but the very essence of protection. A mother might press one into her child's palm before a journey, whispering that its warmth would frighten away fever spirits. A hunter would wear one at his throat, certain its glow could blind the malevolent gaze of forest demons. The amber wasn't merely decorative, it was a living covenant between the people and the cosmos, a piece of the sky's fire made small enough to carry. The crafting of these talismans was itself a sacred act. Artisans selected only the clearest, sun tears amber unclouded by millennia, its transparency proof of purity. Using bone needles and polished flint, they etched symbols into the surface, spirals for eternity, zigzags for lightning's might, or the outline of Sol, the sun goddess whose chariot once lit the heavens. Some amulets held tiny inclusions, a mosquito's wing, a strand of spider's silk believed to magnify the amber's power by capturing life mid-flight. When finished, the pieces were bathed in dawn light for 3 mornings, charging them like batteries of belief. Yet as foreign merchants began to prize amber for its beauty rather than its magic, the rituals frayed. Crusaders and kings traded it like currency, indifferent to the whispers once sealed inside each piece. The amulets that survived were stripped of context, mounted in brooches for nobility, or ground into powder for dubious medicines. Today, glass cases display these carved relics, their labels noting their age and composition, but not the prayers they once answered. Chemists can analyze their molecular structure, even replicate their hue in labs, but the invisible charge, the certainty that this golden gleam could banish nightmares, has dissipated like mist under noon sun. What's lost isn't just the objects, but the intimacy of a world where matter and meaning were inseparable. Modern jewelers still set Baltic amber in pendants, but how many wearers feel the sun's presence humming against their skin? The tribes knew something we've since unlearned. That wonder isn't just in the seeing, but in the believing. The amulets endure, but their light is dimmed, not by time, but by the slow extinguishing of the faith that once made them blaze. Bare feet pressed into glowing embers, not flinching, not burning, this was the test of the Fijian firewalkers, a rite so sacred it blurred the line between mortal and divine. For centuries, warriors of the Sawau tribe approached the hot stones with more than courage. They carried the weight of ancestral pacts. Legend says their founder, Tui Namaliwai, once wrestled a spirit who granted him the power to walk unscathed through flame, a gift passed down through bloodlines. The ritual wasn't just about endurance, it was a dialogue with the unseen. Before stepping onto the coals, participants underwent weeks of purification, fasting, chanting, and abstaining from all touch, even the brush of a stray leaf against their skin. The fire wasn't conquered, it was conversed with, its heat tempered by the blessings of elders and the precision of each footfall, slow as a prayer. Yet walk across those same embers today, and you'll likely hear the click of camera shutters, not the murmurs of spirits. The firewalk persists, but as a spectacle staged for resorts, documented for social media, stripped of its gravity. Tourists gasp as performers stride across the coals, but few ask about the chants that once anchored the ritual, or why certain families alone held the right to perform it. The heat is the same, but the fire's purpose has dimmed. Scientists debate how it's possible the Leidenfrost effect, perhaps, where moisture on the skin creates a protective vapor, but the Sawau never needed physics to explain it. To them, the miracle wasn't the lack of burns, it was the moment when faith turned fire into something holy. What's chilling isn't the commercialization, but the erosion of a philosophy. The original firewalk wasn't a stunt, it was a covenant. Warriors emerged from the coals not just unburned, but changed, their bodies living proof of a world where discipline and devotion could alter reality. Now the coals cool underfoot, and the only transformation is the flicker of a smartphone screen. A few elders still remember the old ways, but their voices are drowned out by the applause. The embers glow on, indifferent to whether they're crossed as sacrament or souvenir. Perhaps the greatest loss isn't the ritual itself, but the understanding it once embodied, that some truths can't be measured in degrees, only in the quiet certainty of those who walk through flame and come out unscathed, carrying more than just the memory of heat. Deep in the forests of West Africa, towering Iroko trees stand like ancient scribes, their bark studded with iron nails that glint like misplaced stars in the daylight. Each nail tells a story. Some were driven in to seal marriage vows, others to mark the end of blood feuds, and a few to bind curses that could unravel generations. These weren't mere symbols, they were contracts forged in wood and metal, where the tree itself became witness and enforcer. Over time, the nails rusted, the bark swelled around them, and the promises they held grew as much a part of the forest as the roots beneath the soil. The rituals were precise. A village elder would strike the first nail, reciting the terms of the agreement while the community watched. For weddings, couples might hammer in 2 nails side by side, their fates intertwined like the metals slowly fusing in the damp air. Disputes were settled with a single nail, its depth and angle signaling the severity of the grievance. Some trees became archives of entire villages, their trunks so densely packed with iron that they chimed softly in the wind, a hollow music of human drama. Yet the true power of these trees lay in their inevitability. Unlike paper contracts that could burn or fade, the nails endured. A curse couldn't be broken until the nail was pried loose, a near impossible task as the wood consumed the metal over decades. If someone violated an oath, elders would point to the untouched nail, its presence an accusation louder than words. The trees didn't just record history, they enforced it, their gnarled surfaces serving as courtroom and ledger all at once. Now the Iroko trees are falling. Loggers prize their dense, termite-resistant wood for furniture and flooring, slicing through centuries of embedded iron without a second thought. The nails clatter to the ground like discarded secrets, their meanings lost to the roar of chainsaws. Historians occasionally salvage them, but without the context of which tree bore them or whose hands drove them in, they're just rusted relics. A few villages still keep the tradition alive, though the trees they use are younger, their bark less storied, their nails fewer. What vanishes with these trees isn't just local history, but a tangible link to a time when agreements demanded more than signatures, they demanded sacrifice, a physical act that left its mark on the world. Today's legal systems may be more precise, but they lack the weight of that iron, the solemnity of watching a vow literally take root. The forest grows quieter, the chorus of creaking metal fading, leaving behind only stumps and unanswered questions. Who promised what, who was forgiven, and who was doomed? The nails remain scattered in the dirt, but the stories they held are already rusting into silence. Beneath the shimmering surface of the Mediterranean, off the coast of Egypt, the ruins of Thonis Heraclean slumber in the silt, a once thriving port city swallowed by the sea over 1,000 years ago. Columns lie toppled like fallen giants. Statues of gods and pharaohs stare blankly through the murk, their features softened by centuries of currents. This isn't myth, it's a tangible echo of Atlantis, a real metropolis that vanished beneath the waves. But Thonis Heraclean is just one whisper in a chorus of drowned worlds. Along India's Gulf of Cambay, sonar has revealed sprawling structures underwater, their geometric walls hinting at a settlement older than Mesopotamia. In Japan, the Yonaguni monument step terraces provoke debates. Are they natural formations or remnants of a forgotten Pacific civilization? The stories that survive are eerily similar. The Breton legend of Wise tells of a city lost to the ocean when its princess ignored warnings and opened floodgates during a storm, a tale that mirrors geological evidence of rising seas drowning Bronze Age coasts. Plato's account of Atlantis, though likely allegorical, aligns with the catastrophic eruption of Thera around 1600 BC, which obliterated Minoan settlements and sent tsunamis racing across the Aegean. These narratives aren't mere fantasies, they're cultural memories fossilized in oral tradition. When fishermen in Gujarat avoid certain waters, speaking of lights dancing below, they might unknowingly echo ancestors who saw actual fires flicker in a now submerged city square. Yet the sea guards its secrets jealously. Salt erodes stone, tides scatter artifacts, and silt buries streets deeper with each passing year. Even with advanced sonar and submersibles, exploration is a dance with oblivion. Off the coast of Cuba, mile-long structures detected at impossible depths resist explanation. Their origins debated, their builders nameless. The ocean floor, we're learning, is less a graveyard than a puzzle box, its pieces scattered across millennia and half the globe. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether these cities existed, but why they fell. Rising waters from melting glaciers, earthquakes that dragged entire coastlines into the abyss, or human folly, the arrogance of building too close to the edge of a world that was always destined to reclaim its own. Every collapsing sandcastle on the beach is a miniature Atlantis, a reminder that the line between land and sea has always been provisional. The waves keep their histories close, sharing only fragments, a bronze statue here, a pottery shard there, just enough to stoke our curiosity, but never enough to satisfy it. The cities sleep on, their stories dissolving like salt in water, leaving us to piece together whispers of what once was. As we've journeyed through these 42 mysterious traditions lost in time, one truth emerges: every vanished practice leaves a void in our understanding of humanity. These rituals, whether spiritual, artistic, or practical, were threads in the tapestry of human culture. Their disappearance reminds us to cherish and document the traditions that still survive. Which of these lost customs resonates most with you? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more explorations into history's hidden corners. The sands of time may bury much, but curiosity will always dig it up. Yet the story doesn't end with what's been lost, it continues with what we might still reclaim. Hidden in forgotten manuscripts, whispered in fading oral traditions, or buried beneath layers of modern noise, fragments of these practices linger. Scholars and revivalists worldwide are piecing together clues like detectives solving ancient mysteries. The Tibetan sky burial's philosophy of impermanence echoes in modern eco-conscious funerals. Polynesian fire dancers inspire contemporary performances that blend old movements with new meanings. Even the coded silk weavings of Damascus find their legacy in high-tech fabric encryption today. Perhaps the most poignant lesson isn't about mourning the past, but about listening for its echoes in the present. Every time a child learns a traditional craft, a linguist records an endangered dialect, or a historian deciphers an old symbol, we reweave a thread of that frayed tapestry. The past whispers to us through artifacts, through art, through the stubborn persistence of rituals that refuse to vanish entirely. What if the true mystery isn't how these traditions were lost, but how many are still waiting to be found, hidden in plain sight, disguised as folklore, or tucked into the margins of history? The conversation doesn't stop here. Your curiosity fuels these discoveries. Have you encountered a tradition on the brink of fading, or one that's been brought back to life? The comments are your space to share, to question, to connect. And if this journey through time has left you hungry for more, remember to hit that subscribe button. Together, we'll keep unearthing the stories that shape us, one layer of sand at a time. History isn't just what's behind us, it's what we choose to carry forward. So tell us, which thread will you pull on next? The answers, like the traditions themselves, are